Welcome back to building a desktop hi-fi system. So in part one we explored a number of different options, and here in part two I'm going to put my pro audio hat on and look at solving this problem from a very different angle. And why am I doing that? Because I want to really reflect a little bit more on why I'm making this series in the first place. Because everybody needs a desktop system for a different reason. Some just to listen to music, some for gaming, some for mixing and editing video or audio, some for mastering and that audio, and some for all of them. And this really got kicked off because my sound engineer, Pierre Nicholas, well, his mixing and mastering room was just down the road from me. So when he had something ready, he'd say, "Oh, Harley, can you pop over?" And I'd nip in the car or on the bicycle and go over to his place. And 5 minutes later, we're listening together and really going into the detail, experiencing everything. And then I would come back, go into the listening room, the Pearl Acoustics listening room, listen on the Sibelius, listen in the car, listen on the kitchen radio. It was very easy to make good quality decisions. However, he moved further away and his focus is more elsewhere at the moment. So I'm using a great and very experienced audio mixing and mastering engineer, Stoffel de Laat, but he's based in Antwerp, which is at least an hour's drive from me. And if the traffic's bad or the weather's bad like it is today, then it could be nearly 2 hours. And so obviously nipping over to hear something is not an option. So he has to send me files. And the worry for me is, if I'm making quantitative decisions about, okay, let's reduce the harshness on the violin by 3 dB, or let's pan them to left or right or whatever. I'm making these decisions on a system that sounds very different from his. So we need to get more aligned. And this is kind of where we got started. So today I'm putting my pro hat on, as I say, and I want to approach solving this problem of listening to music on a desktop by looking at it from a different angle. Okay. Now, some of the equipment and some of the findings of part one, I'm sure we're going to bring in to this edition, but some of it we will leave behind because we'll say, this isn't cutting the mustard. It's not getting to the level that I want to get at, because I really want to take it as far as I possibly can to get the best possible result, regardless of money. I will be looking at budgets, but for me, I need the right result to save that long trip to Antwerp. Now, what I think is important to reflect on is that pro audio people have a very different attitude to the consumer market, the domestic hi-fi market, for a very fundamental reason, that a piece of equipment has to earn its keep. So if I buy a new microphone or a new piece of equipment, I'm thinking, how many recordings have I got to make to get that paid for? How long will it last for? When I write it off against tax over 5 years, what will its resale value be after 5 years? Will I want to resell it or get rid of it? I don't want to. I want stuff to last forever. For example, in the studio, you've probably seen in the intro to these videos, on location, I'm wearing the headphones from Audio-Technica, the AT50s. Now, I've had these since like 2013, so that's 10 years, the same pair. Now, I've changed their ear cups and the headbands and everything a couple of times since then, and I have another pair for my customers, so they always got a nice clean pair to wear if they want to listen as well. So they have to work, and I don't like changing them because I want to be familiar with the sound. Maybe somebody changes the design or improves them, and then it's very hard to adjust to this new sound and knowing whether it's right or wrong. So pro audio has got to be very good value for money. It's got to be very reliable. It means plug in and forget about it. But it's also got to be very clean and clinical. I'm not interested in coloration at this stage, in making something sound nice. I'm interested in facts and information. And I want ease of use. I mean, what does that mean? It means buttons and dials instead of drop-down menus. And why is that? Because when you're mixing and mastering, you've got such complicated computer interfaces with all the screens and all the different technology, and you have to click and cut and drop and drag and things. The last thing you want to do that is to do the same thing with your equipment. What you really want to do is lean forward, hit the stereo mono button or whatever you want to do, volume up, volume down, in a very tactile way. Well, at least I do. And so this is another thing which you'll see will come back later on in this talk. Now, the difference between part one is, in part two, I've decided I only want to look at active monitors, powered monitors. So, and there are so many to choose from, just like there's so many desktop loudspeakers which are not passive. The active ones are incredible. I mean, just to name a few, just to give you a few ideas, some that you may know, there's the Genelec 8010. It's a very famous Genelec, very small, only €660 a pair with an amplifier built in. You've got the Neumann KH80s, which are €1,000 a pair. You've got the Yamaha HS7s, €700 a pair. The Dynaudio, the Lid 5, which is not so much pro audio, but it's very much in there. It's an active loudspeaker, really designed for home and desktop use. Acoustics even more so, the little M20 at €500 a pair. And then of course in the other direction you've got like the LS50s, the wireless ones. 2,200 is their retail price, you know, with a more or less a single point source to hear from. You know, all of these things are what I call, you know, active powered loudspeakers, which we certainly should consider before writing them off. And I know that in the, you know, the 2-channel listening like we have in the listening room, you know, the thought of an active loudspeaker is almost unheard of. You know, we want to have the character of the Sugden amp or the Deckware amp or an English Acoustics or whatever it is you're listening, or a Pass Labs, and we find that purity really important. In a desktop setup, I think in many ways, although I like the setup in part one with the ATCs, SEM7s, the little Maya amplifier from Project and the Qutest DAC or the Eversolo DAC, although I liked all that, in this game, in this field, I think we need to look at it in a different way, because on the desktop, it's always going to be a different experience. I want to avoid obsolescence, and one of the things I would say is if you're going to go for active loudspeakers, and also you don't really want to have something that can't be physically plugged in. And I'll tell you why, because there are so many incidents of people buying beautiful, you know, Bluetooth loudspeakers, really expensive ones. Remember the early Zeppelins for the iPod just sat on the top, and there's lots of other makes which are dependent on a iPhone or a smartphone interface, but when they don't upgrade their software for the latest version, or the latest version doesn't support it, you're sitting with this beautiful lump in the middle of your living room which basically you can't use. And that's a crime. To see that go on the recycling heap because somebody in the software is not being updated is is not acceptable for me. I've got a old quad vintage system in my office, and to be honest with you, I mean, it's from the 80s, some of it's from the 70s, and it still works fine. So I'm always aware that when we're building things for the desktop, as few components as possible should be dependent on things beyond our control. When I'm talking about powered things, I'm really talking about systems which you can physically connect with a cable and that won't become obsolete. But the powered monitors, especially the Neumanns, the Yamahas and the Genelecs, They're all designed specifically for near field, listening from a distance of 1 meter or a little bit less than a meter, 3 feet, to maybe 1.5 meters to about 6 feet away, 2 meters away. That's where they're designed to be listened to in that length. And this is crucial for a really, really good result. The Yamaha HS7s, well, you've seen I use them when I'm out and about, I'm on location. Why? They play very, very loud. They're not very pleasant to listen to in a domestic situation because they're a little bit harsh. You can trim them down. They will all have little buttons and adjusters on the back. The Pro ones will. You can just connect with your balance cable. But the thing about them is that they will show every single detail, minute detail. So if a violin is coming in a little bit earlier, we'll hear that bow hitting the string very clearly, and we can say, look, you're a little bit ahead there, or this, that, and so that's what they're for. But they can also work on a desktop situation, but you're going to have to make sure that you use the right settings and the rest of your equipment will match nicely with them. So what did I choose out of all of these options? Well, I'll tell you, I chose the Neumanns, not the KH, not the 80s, but the 120s. They're a little bit bigger, and they're €900 each, so 1,800 a pair, which on the face of it is not an extraordinarily expensive amount of money. It is for some people, I know. But, and here is where I broke all my rules, I went for the Neumann KH750 subwoofer, which was €1,500, and I went for the Neumann MAT microphone at 281. And I thought, well, I don't need the silly Neumann microphone. I've got plenty of microphones of my own if I want to do testing and everything. But Stoffel, my friend, said, Harley, you really need this. Trust me. And he's a very experienced engineer, so I followed his advice. So the whole of that came to €3,581 for the 3 units and the microphone. Now, but you can get the Neumann 80s in a complete kit for about nearly 1,000 less, like 2,800, something like that. They've got these special deals going. But let me tell you why I chose them. Firstly, they're front ported. So that's very, very important for me. I don't. If they're going to be ported, they've got to be front ported. And although they're made, the name Neumann is on the front. Actually, the KH, the Neumann KH120, stands for Klein and Hummel, and Klein and Hummel have been around as a company since 1945, and they've been designing professional studio loudspeaker systems since then. So there's not much they didn't know. And Sennheiser, the headphone and microphone company, bought Klein and Hummel, took over them, and they also own Neumann, and they put this system into the Neumann branding. But so you're in good company. And obviously I'd heard the setup in Antwerp, and I wanted to try it for myself so I could get the same sound as Stoffel has. But the difference is when I set it all up, well, I'll explain. Well, first of all, I switched on I put the little 120s on the stands with just connecting them straight to the DAC. All right, a simple DAC with a balanced out, the DH, the D400 from SMSL, and you know what? It sounded pretty average. I think I much preferred the sound of the ATC SCM7s with a little project amp. It wasn't really anything exciting. I tried fiddling, I tried changing the bass and the this and bringing down the treble, and it was okay, nothing special. Then I connected the subwoofer, the 750, and followed the instructions on the basic instructions that you get with Neumann, measuring the distances stuff, and it was awful. I mean, it was terrible. Everything I hate about subwoofers, boom, 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 slightly out of time, slightly out of phase, you know, just nothing working. Kind of disappointed at this stage because I thought it would be a lot better. But then I connected up the microphone. Now I need to say, if you're going to go down this road, I need to warn you, this is not straightforward. For a start, you'll need to have an Ethernet cable from each of the 3 devices and your computer all going to the same hub. So in my case, I'd have a long runs of Ethernet cables going around into this hub. This is not forever, it's just for the setup tests. Then you'll need a mic stand, no problem for me, of course. Then you'll need lots of cables. You'll need a cable from the microphone, a balance cable, obviously, into the system. You'll need balance cables between the other systems. You'll need a lot of cables, but you'll also need a desktop audio interface, which allows you to do the testing. So the microphone for the Neumann microphone will have to go in. So I used my little Focusrite on my desk, which I use just for my microphone for conference calls and stuff. And on the back of the Focusrite, there's 2 jack plugs, but they're balanced outputs. So I needed to get 2 balanced jack plugs into balanced cables into the subwoofer and set all this up. It was really a lot of fiddle. But once I'd done that, you come into the software and it says enter the serial number of your equipment, you put it all in, and when everything adds up, it says welcome. And from there, actually, it's quite simple. The system says move the microphone 2 centimeters to the left, 2 centimeters to the right, 2 centimeters high, 2 centimeters low. It's really, really precise stuff. It was like 86 centimeters from the microphone to the loudspeaker, and on each direction. It really was very, very precise, but very professionally done. And after all that, it says congratulations, it's now finished. It then shows you the graph. I couldn't believe it. I mean, they did show you a graph before. Sadly, I didn't photograph it. But look at the graph when it's finished. It's basically plus minus 2 dB from 15 hertz right the way through to 20,000 hertz. I mean, it's completely flat in the room, because this software isn't just adjusting the frequency response, it's also adjusting the phasing and what's going on between the all 3 loudspeakers. And if I could have shown you the original graph before the compensation took place, I was like plus 30 dB, minus 20 dB in various places. The bass was all over the place. No wonder it sounded horrible. But as a lot of hi-fi people will tell you, a flat response doesn't necessarily mean it's going to sound nice. So then you can play music through it, and then you can switch back to the old setting and you switch back to the new setting. It was day and night. It was unbelievable. I couldn't hear the subwoofer anymore. I just heard deep, 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 detailed bass, nice and crisp. The top was not harsh anymore. Everything sounded great. The soundstage was fabulous. It was a joy. So honestly, I don't think that putting any loudspeakers on my desk, even if you went for the Magico A1s, which are amazing speakers, I think they're about 12,000, 14,000 euros, maybe more. I don't think it's going to sound better, because it's this correction that's made these systems sound so brilliant, and brilliant it is. So I think, so you've got to that stage, but now you've got to think, oh, I need something to drive it. So at this point, I'm looking at DACs, and I'm going to talk about the SMSL D400 and the fact they've got a new one coming out in a minute. But first of all, we had the Eversolo DAC from part 1, which I was so impressed with. Money's no object in this in part 2, don't forget. But I plugged it in, put it on the desktop, connected it all up to the Neumanns. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Easy to use, volume control, just turn the volume up, down, lovely little remote control if I want to, on mute or up and down, absolutely lovely. So now I've got a desktop with the two little 120s and a little Eversolo, and that's it. Perfect. I don't need any more. My desk is clear. I could walk away and say, yeah, that's it. But of course, we mustn't forget that there are things like the D400 EX and the SMSL M50 and the Fiio R7. Now the 500, I wanted to get an SMSL 500 because I loved its little shape. It had balanced out, it had all the things I was looking for, but sadly I couldn't get my hands on one for this video. But the Fiio R7, well, I mean, I've seen a couple of YouTube reviews and Darko talking about it, and it seems so damn complicated. And also this big dependency on the phone interface, the smartphone, and basically it is a smartphone all in the box. And I know it's going to be connected to the internet. So for me, I thought, you know what, I'm going to park that for now. Maybe that wasn't the right decision. But the Eversolo works so well. And as I said in part one, the headphone amp, you plug that in, it sounded great. So I've got everything in there. Let me just go over the points again. Small footprint, looked and feel great, loved the rotary knob, easy to use, headphones were great. There is a smartphone app, but you don't need to use it. It was very, very good with the Neumann system. So for 3,700 euros, you've got that, you've got everything. 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, we know now is completely flat. It doesn't have a fixed output as far as I can see. Correct me if I'm wrong, I couldn't find it. So you're always got the volume control playing there. So you can't use it purely just as a DAC if you wanted to. But I didn't buy it. I didn't buy it. I didn't buy the Eversolo. And I'll tell you why. It is good and I thoroughly recommend it. But for my application, I went for something else. And I went for the SPL Phonitor 2. Now, SPL is a company started by Wolfgang Neumann, no relationship to the other Neumann as far as I'm aware, in 1983, although he'd been in the recording industry and in the broadcast industry on pro audio side long before then. And as you can see, it's got no menus, it's just buttons and dials. And the reason I went for this is because of its headphone functionality. Now, as I've said before, I don't really like wearing headphones. The only time I wear headphones is when I'm mastering music or when I'm listening to a master, and just if it's late at night, I don't want to disturb someone, but generally I like to listen to stereo pair. Why? Because the sound of the left loudspeaker comes into my right here, just as the right loudspeaker comes into my left. When you put on headphones, everything is left and everything is right. It's binary. And Wolfgang Neumann invented a crossfeed system where you can adjust the angle. You say, well, I want my loudspeakers at 30 degrees and I want to have a certain amount of bleed from left to right. And he designed it really brilliantly. And has got a center button as well, so you can pull the voice a little bit further in or out, because as you change the angle, things start to move and you can adjust that. And that's brilliant. So when I'm putting my headphones on, I'm still getting as close as possible to a real 2-channel stereo system as I would get, you know, by just listening through loudspeakers. And for me, that alone was worth it. Now, if you've watched my other videos, you'll also know that I get irritated sometimes by recordings, stereo recordings, where the musicians are wandering around, where the microphones are placed in such a way that they sort of drift from left to right. Very, very annoying. Well, this has got a mono button. But the mono button for me is also very useful because it's got a phase inversion button. And the phase inversion button is brilliant because if I want to check if something's in the middle of the mix, if Stoffel's put it right in the middle or slightly to the left or right, I slap it into mono, do the phase inversion on the left channel or the right channel, and if I can still hear whatever it is, the piano or the singer or the bass, then it's not in the center. And that's a really easy way, because if it's in the center, dead center, it will totally disappear when you change by 180 degrees the phasing of left and right. For me, that's a really useful thing. Probably for you, completely useless. But for me, it was useful. I also like the VU meters. I'd not like the look of them, but it's very useful. If AJ's sending me an edit from London of like this video, for example, I can see instantly how much input is coming in and what level we're set at compared to another one. So it's also got this, they call 120 volt technology, so the dynamic range is phenomenal. And if I ever go deaf or get hard of hearing, there's a little button on the bottom, a little slide button at the bottom, which will increase the whole output by another 24 decibels, which will mean it'll be deafening even with my 300 ohm headphones. But the good thing is there's no obsolescence on this. This thing should last forever. It's not dependent on any other technology at all because there's no DAC in it. There is one other little dial on it, which I'm not embarrassed to say I find useful. You've got mono, you've got stereo, and then you've got lateral. And lateral is like a balance, slightly left and right. But what it does is it shifts. When you go to the left, if you go the full amount, it'll give a boost on the left channel of 2.5 dB and on the right channel minus 2.5 dB. So it's like a tilt. And it's really designed if you have a hearing difference. Now, I know for a fact that my left ear is slightly quieter at key points than my right ear. Not by a lot, it's about 1.5 decibels. So if I just dial that slightly to the left, I can get something right back in the center of the mix. And I know it's not Stoffel that's changed it or Pierre Nicholas, it's actually in the right place. And that for me is critical. 1.5 dB, most people can't hear it, but I can just detect that it's coming correctly into the middle. So all of these things, plus it's got a self-learning remote control system. So by getting the remote control from a DAC, for example, like the Eversolo or the D400, I can program it and I can use the volume control on that device to turn the volume up and down on this preamplifier headphone amplifier. It's got all the inputs and outputs I need, and it works fantastically. It's an amazing, amazing piece of kit. This is staying on my desktop. In the end, I had a choice for the DAC. Which DAC am I going to go for? Am I going to go for the Chord Qutest at 1,495 euros? Am I going to go for the Eversolo 699? Or am I going to go for the SMSL D400 EX? Now, I've ruled out the Eversolo because I think if you're going to go for the Neumann setup, which I find really amazing, just go with the Eversolo, put it on your desk, forget it, it's fine. That's it on its own. If you want cross-field technology, if you want to be able to do phasing control, if you want lateral movement left and right, if you want all of those things in your headphones and in your system, then go for the Phonitor 2. But if you're going for the Phonitor 2, there's no point putting an Eversolo there because it just confuses the matter. You've got two objects doing more or less the same thing. And here is, so the battle came down to the Chord Qutest or the SMSL D400 EX, which is not cheap. It's 900 euros, retail price. But when I listened to the Chord Qutest, it sounded lovely and warm and nice and natural and really beautiful for acoustic instruments. Everything sounded very natural. But when I switched to the SMSL D400, which has a fixed output, which is really useful because it means I can use the same remote control for the 400 and also power the volume on the Phonitor without any conflict or errors. When I switched to that SMSL, the soundstage got wider. It just opened up, and the instruments were just slightly spaced further apart and just a little bit more natural. And it was a very similar experience to my comparison I made with the A21 SE Sugden against the Int 25 Pass Labs. You know, the Qutest was very much like the Pass Labs. It was very correct, very neat, just very nice and collected. But the SMSL was just more open. And when I looked into it more closely and went into the menu on the SMSL and went up and down and scrolling up and down, I found that the standard setting for the D400 EX, there was a DSD filters, and the standard is wide. So they've got narrow and wide, and it was on wide because it's the standard setting. And that's why. So when I switched the SMSL onto narrow, you know what? It sounded almost identical to the Chord Qutest, almost identical. I really was struggling to tell them apart and decide which one I liked. And for that, I was listening to Willie Nelson, because there's a little house on the hill or whatever it's called. There's a track there on his album. And if the DAC is a little bit harsh or bright, his voice becomes a bit thin and raucous. And if it's very warm and deep, his voice becomes sort of, yeah, more cozy, if you like. So it's very easy to hear the differences. And there was a small difference, but almost imperceptible. And the SMSL, of course, has got, you know, what, 5 color filters they call it, a bit similar to the Qutest, but the Qutest, of course, has real colors. When you change the filter, the thing changes color, and you have to remember which color is the one you like. But as I say, it's got this fixed and variable output. So it's a bit of an ugly partnership. You can see it, you know, it's the silver and the black. They weren't designed to sit on top of each other or be on my desk, but I can get used to that. I mean, that's not really a problem. So for me, the winner was the SMSL D400 EX. Now, I've just heard that SMSL are going to launch a new DX, because this one, the dial's in the middle and flat and is a bit annoying if you really want to change the volume. I don't. In my setting, it's going to be on fixed output the whole time. So for me, it's not an issue. And I believe that the new one is going to be a very similar performance to the old one, but only time will tell. So that's the one I had, and it works for me, and I'm really, really happy. So let's conclude. Let's wind up this two-part series here. You know, we don't necessarily choose in the first place equipment logically. That's the message. The best performance is not always the best for us, and I think that's a very important thing to consider. The secret is to stay solution focused. I started experimenting all through part 1 and now again, and then I realized, what is the problem I'm trying to solve here? I don't want to travel all the way from home to Antwerp just to hear a master. So I need to recreate what Stoffel's doing, but I also want it to work for me. So the other thing I want to point with is, accept that HiFi is an unplanned journey. It's not a straight line. It took me a long way via. I was really excited about the Annie, but it didn't work for me. It will work for someone else, but it didn't for me. It's not a straight line. Times change, technology change, systems change. We change. My hearing today is not on my left ear as perfect as it used to be. Obviously, I'm getting older. Having a piece of kit that will compensate for that and give me another 10 years of mastering, hopefully, fabulous. If that works, great, bring it on. There will always be something better in the industry, always. But I honestly believe for desktops, this Neumann kit, set up properly with all the hassle of doing it, and if you haven't got an audio interface and all those leads, maybe there's someone you know who can come around and you can do it together. It's really great fun when it's all done. So the secret thing is to try as many pieces as possible. Remember my old Bush radio, it's fantastic, all restored, but I can't listen to a radio on it. So if it doesn't look right, is another message I'd say to you for home and also for desktop, or it doesn't feel right, you know, something annoys you about it, like the fact I couldn't turn the Qutest DAC off. It probably won't be right in the long time. If it doesn't bother you, you can't turn it off, then it's not an issue. So be careful about that. You know, remember those points. If it doesn't look right, if it doesn't feel right, it probably won't be right, and you'll very soon find sort of faults or things that annoy you about it. So when you find something that works for you and you like it, stick with it. Don't change it, because there's no point. You're just going to waste your time. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to waste money. Unless there's some major change, just enjoy it, because it's about listening to music. It's about just, you know, listening to all the different versions of the Schubert Sonata number 21 or Kid A, or all the music that you want to listen to. That's why you bought it, to listen to music, I suppose. My final point, and maybe this will upset some people, I hope it doesn't, desktop hi-fi is never, for me anyway, going to sound as nice as being in the listening room here, sitting on the couch, listening to the Sibelius speakers fill the room, because they're filling the whole room, and you can close your eyes and really experience everything in front of you. You can do it on a desktop, but it's always going to be in your face. It's always a bit like having headphones on. The treble is always going to be very present because it's so close to you. It's going to sound great, the desktop, but it's not, for me, natural. It's not like sitting in a concert hall. When you sit in a concert hall or with a group of musicians, acoustic musicians, and no microphones, live, there isn't any bright treble and fantastic zings, because once you're more than 2 or 3 meters back, all that's become blended and natural and smooth. And that's what I like. I like to sit back in the couch, relax, glass of wine, glass of water, cup of coffee, sometimes with friends, and just enjoy and get sucked into it. And that for me doesn't happen in the desktop. The desktop is still a sort of place of work. And although it can be good to listen for a short while, it's not for hours and hours. So for me, it's a tool that will hopefully see me out. This kit that you see in front of you, the Phonitor 2 with the D400 from SMSL. Thank you, SMSL. Great design, fantastic piece of cake, great build quality, looks fabulous. This combination, I'm hoping if you pop round to here in 20 years' time, if God willing I'm still alive, I'll be listening to this and enjoying it. And I can use my little remote control. If I'm in my nursing home, sitting back, I can turn it up or down and not disturb the nurses. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this 2-part series. I've rambled on a bit too longer than I planned. I hope you don't mind. And I'll see you in the next video, where we will certainly be talking about music, and I'll be discussing some differences and types of music, as I will be throughout the rest of these series. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Enjoy the music.